The writing industry has been around for a very long time. The first author is considered to be from the 23rd century of BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, and Hejuana, a princess, a priestess, writer, and poet. From the Bronze Age to the present day, literature has evolved drastically. The history of controversial authors is between those dates of range. What made these authors controversial were their own controversial history, sexual perversions, acts of violence, and provocative religious views. The world is full of authors, controversial or not. Though many of these authors have controversial pieces of literature, their pasts also provide context into their controversial lives. Marquis de Sade was born in June of 1740 in Paris, France. He was a French nobleman whose writings were infamous for its perverse and highly sexual content, having given rise to the term sadism. In 1763, he married to a high-ranking bourgeois family member's daughter, where they had 2 sons and 1 daughter. But into the first month of marriage, he began an affair with an actress. He also invited prostitutes to his home, subjecting them to horrific abuse. His actions led to his first imprisonment, though he was released after a few months, only to resume his life of debauchery. In 1768, his first public scandal erupted, the Rose Keller affair. Keller was allegedly a prostitute Sade had met and taken to his home, where he locked her up and abused her. She managed to escape and reported him to the authorities, leading to his imprisonment in the fortress of Pierre-en-Size. Upon release, he retreated to his chateau at La Coste and continued his scandalous lifestyle. In 1772, he went to Marseille to get money, as he had acquired some debt. While there, he sent his male servant to find prostitutes for him, where he continued on with his fantasies. During an encounter, the women he hired had helped themselves to a pillbox filled with candies that contained the aphrodisiac Spanish fly. In fear they had been poisoned, they alerted the authorities. Sade and his servant were both arrested, sent to the fortress of Milan. The parliament sentenced them to death by default, but Sade escaped before execution, taking refuge in his chateau, where his wife became his accomplice. After further accusations from the outraged parents in the neighborhood, he fled again for a short period to Italy with his sister-in-law, who then became his mistress. He would return to his chateau in November of 1776. A series of scandals ensued, and his reputation was notorious as immediate action was taken to detain him in Paris. He was again arrested and sent to the dungeon of Vincennes on February of 1777. The conditions of the prison were harsh. He didn't get along with anyone and tried to get others to revolt. His wife visited him, but eventually those visits were banned as he suspected her of abandoning him, so he lashed out. It was there in prison, out of boredom and anger, that he began writing very graphic novels and plays, including Dialogue Between a Priest and a Dying Man, which was written in July of 1782, about a dying man challenging the priest's religious beliefs. The writing presented arguments for atheism and hedonism. In February of 1784, he wrote 120 Days of Sodom on a roll of paper, roughly 39 feet long. This novel, his most controversial piece of literature, depicts themes of extreme sexual violence and perversion. The story follows 4 libertines who each represent different aspects of power and corruption as they indulge in their most depraved fantasies, taking place in a remote chateau. It was not published until the early 20th century, but went on to become one of the most disturbing pieces of literature, as well as its film. 4 years later, in 1978, he wrote Crimes of Passion, a novella of short stories that explore themes of love, lust, and sexuality through transgressive and immoral behavior. During the French Revolution, he narrowly escaped execution and spent time in an insane asylum. Upon his release in 1790, he wrote the novel Justine and Juliet. Justine follows a young woman who struggles to remain her virtue and adhere to moral principles. Juliet, a separate novel, and also Justine's sister, follows Juliet, who is depicted as a libertine and embraces her sexuality in forms of debauchery without guilt or remorse. Sade became the secretary of revolutionary section of Le Pic in 1792, where he was chosen as a delegate to visit hospitals and give speeches. During the Reign of Terror, he saved his father-in-law, even though his father-in-law had once put him in prison. Though he had spoken in favor of the revolution, he was wrongfully accused of being too moderate and almost got executed. He escaped the guillotine by chance and lived in poverty. However, on March of 1801, he was arrested and sent to Charenton, where he sparked new scandals. He began working on his 10-volume novel, The Days of Florbel, but only 2 volumes were written. After his death in 1814, his oldest son burned the remaining manuscripts. Despite his reprehensible actions, his works continue to influence literature, though they were banned in France, the United States, and the United Kingdom until the 1960s. Marquis de Sade's life was a cascade of controversy and scandal. His legacy is a stark reminder of the darkest angles of human nature and the thin line between artistic expression and moral depravity. The German novelist and essayist Ernst Jünger was born in March of 1895 and was a contradictory figure in the 20th century German literature. In 1914, he volunteered for the German army, which was at the outbreak of World War I, where he served as an officer. He was noted for his bravery as he was wounded many times, and in 1918, he was awarded the prestigious Pour le Mérite Medal. After the war in 1920, Jünger published The Storm of Steel, a diary which contains vivid recollections of his life and experiences in combat. The book can be read as an anti-war book and describes the horrors of war, without necessarily condemning it or going into the political causes. The novel lacks description of emotional effects of war, and some have even criticized the novel for glorifying war and nationalism. However, the book was a success with critics, the public, in Germany, and other countries. Once discharged from the army in 1923, Jünger studied zoology and botany at the universities of Leipzig and Naples. He published more recollections and reflections on his experiences in the war, The Grove, and Fire and Blood in 1925. In the late 1920s, and despite his early nationalistic writings, he declined Adolf Hitler's offer of friendship in joining the Nazi movement. While Hitler ruled, he wrote the novel On the Marble Cliffs in 1939, which was about the destruction of peaceful lands. He served as an army staff officer in Paris during World War II. However, by 1943, he had turned against the Nazi totalitarianism and its world domination ambitions, which can be seen in his work, The Peace. In 1944, Jünger was dismissed from the army after being indirectly linked to officers plotting to assassinate Hitler. After the war, he faced suspicion as a potential Nazi sympathizer and was banned from publishing in Germany for 4 years. Despite this, he continued to write, reflecting on his experiences and observations. Ernst Jünger's life and literature reflect the tumultuous times he lived through, marked by bravery, controversy, and introspection. His works continue to provoke discussion and debate. Jack Henry Abbott, an American criminal and author, was born in January of 1944 at a now decommissioned United States aircraft base. His early life was marked by turmoil as he was born to a soldier for a father and a Chinese-American prostitute for a mother. At just 16, he was sent to reform school after run-ins with the law and trouble with his teachers. By the age of 21, he served a sentence for forgery in a Utah prison. His sentence took a dark turn when he stabbed a fellow inmate to death, earning an additional 3 to 20 years. His criminal career escalated further in 1971 when he escaped prison and committed a bank robbery in Colorado, resulting in a 19-year extension to his sentence. In prison, he refused to obey guards' orders and spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. While in prison, Abbott reached out to renowned author Norman Mailer in 1977. Mailer was writing about convicted murderer Gary Gilmore and became intrigued by Abbott's own prison experiences. Mailer agreed to Abbott's request and published the novel In the Belly of the Beast about Abbott's life in prison, which included his letters to Mailer. The novel exposes the brutal realities of the prison system, highlighting themes of violence, dehumanization, and the desperate yearning for freedom. In June of 1980, Abbott was released from prison. Mailer was under criticism for aiding in the release of Abbott as he had supported his attempts to gain parole. Unfortunately, the support would not look good for Mailer. Only 6 weeks after getting out of prison, Abbott went to a small cafe in Manhattan. An argument ensued with an employee of the restaurant where he was told he couldn't use the bathroom as it was for staff only. In a short temper, Abbott stabbed the employee, Richard Aden, to death. Ironically, the New York Times published a positive review of In the Belly of the Beast the following day as they were unaware of his most recent crime. Abbott was quickly arrested and charged with the murder of Richard Aden. In January of 1982, he was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years to life. The widow of Aden sued Abbott for $7.5 million in damages, and she received all profits from the book. In 1987, Abbott published another book titled My Return. The novel was about the death of Richard Aden, the trial, and his return to prison. He did not receive any royalties from the publication of this book. He appeared before the Board of Parole in 2001, but was turned away as they felt he lacked remorse for his crimes, and his lengthy criminal record did not help his case. 1 year later, in February of 2002, he constructed a noose with bedsheets and shoelaces, ending his life in his prison cell. Jack Henry Abbott's life is a stark reminder of the complexities of the human condition, the failures of the prison system, and the tragic consequences of the unchecked anger and violence. Louis Althusser, a French philosopher born in October of 1918 who attempted to fuse Marxism and structuralism, left a lasting impact on the 20th century thought, but his personal life ended in tragedy. He was born in French Algeria in the town of Vermandres. He went into the French army in 1939, but was captured by German troops in 1940, where he spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner in a war camp. After the war in 1948, he joined the French Communist Party and began teaching at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, where he influenced many generations of students over 3 years. His groundbreaking works, Remarks and Reading Capital, were published in 1965, challenging the common view of Marxism as a philosophy focused on humanism and individualism. The traditional view sees history as a process aimed at fulfilling human nature under communism. He argued that this view overemphasized Marx's early work, influenced by Hegelian philosophy, and overlooked his later scientific writings such as Capital. The shift from Marx's early philosophical views to his later scientific ones were described as an epistemological break. In his essay Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses in 1969, he argued that politics, law, and ideology played significant roles in Marx's later thought, countering the view that economics alone determined everything. Althusser's work aligned with French structuralism, emphasizing the historical process over the individual consciousness. His ideas rejuvenated Marxism for a new generation, though they were met with resistance from traditional communist parties. In 1974, he was compelled to write a self-criticism for what was called theoretical mistakes and elements of self-criticism. His legacy was damaged by a tragic event in November 1980. He suffered a mental breakdown and, in response, strangled his wife to death. He was seen as unfit to stand trial, as he suffered from manic depression a majority of his life. The act impacted his legacy, casting a shadow over his intellectual contributions due to the event that happened in 1980. Louis Althusser remains a controversial figure, celebrated for his innovative Marxist theories, but infamous for the tragic event that overshadowed his later years. His life serves as a reminder of the complex interaction between brilliant ideas and personal struggles. Aleister Crowley, born in England on October of 1875, was a British occultist, writer, and mountaineer. He was a practitioner of magic and called himself the Beast 666. He became influential, though he didn't obtain a cult following until after his death in December of 1947. Crowley's father, heir to a brewing business, became a preacher for a Christian group, Plymouth Brethren. However, Crowley formed a deep dislike for Christianity. In college, he abandoned his birth name, Edward Alexander Crowley, in favor of Aleister Crowley. He dropped out of the Trinity College in Cambridge in 1898 and used his inheritance to travel and begin publishing his writings. That same year, he published a book of poetry, and with that, many more books followed. Crowley developed a keen interest in occultism, a set of beliefs and practices involving mystical or supernatural beings that science and regular religions don't usually cover. It often deals with hidden or secret ideas like mysticism and magic. He joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was derived from the Rosicrucians. He visited Egypt in 1904, where he reported a mystical experience and wrote the Book of Law, a sacred text that outlined his philosophy and beliefs. The book laid the foundation of the Lema, a spiritual movement promoting individualism, personal freedom, and the pursuit of one's true will. Crowley claimed the book was dictated to him by a supernatural being named Iwas over 3 days. The controversy comes from authenticity. Skeptics questioned whether Crowley did receive the text supernaturally, or if he wrote it himself. The content also challenges traditional religious and moral values. Crowley's famous statement, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of law," became the foundation of the new religion, the Lemma. though it wasn't new, and a French author, François Rabelais, had written it more than 300 years earlier. In 1909, he began the Equinox series, where he spread his teachings with the help of a military strategist and historian, J.F.C. Fuller. During World War I, he lived in the U.S., writing for a pro-German propagandist newspaper, Fatherland. He later moved to Cefalu, Italy, where he built a sanctuary titled the Abbey of Belema. During his time in 1922, he wrote The Diary of a Drug Fiend, which is said to be based on personal experience. His controversy begins when a young follower of his, Raoul Loveday, died under his care after participating in sacrilegious rituals, drinking from a polluted stream, and developing a liver infection. The British press called him the wickedest man in the world, and he was expelled from Italy in 1923. Allegedly, these rituals involved sex magic, drug use, and animal sacrifice. He spent the last of his inheritance on travel and luxuries and returned to England in the early 1930s. His last and notable achievement of publication was the Book of Thoth in 1944, interpreting a new tarot card deck designed with Rita Harris. Aleister Crowley would pass away in poverty in 1947. His life was a blend of mysticism, controversy, and influence, but it wasn't until his death where he became a figure of popular culture, being featured on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club album cover, and Led Zeppelin purchasing a home he previously owned near Loch Ness, Scotland. J.G. Ballard, born in Shanghai in November of 1930, was a British author of science fiction, known for his provocative works of fiction that explore human psychology, technology, sex, and mass media. His early life was marked by his father's work as a British business executive based in China. During World War II, Ballard spent 4 years of his childhood in a Japanese prison camp near Shanghai. The experience can be seen in his novel, Empire of the Sun, in 1984. After dropping out of the King's College in Cambridge, Ballard began writing short stories such as The Violent Noon, which was published in a newspaper after winning a competition. By the 1960s, he transitioned to longer works such as The Drowned World and The Wind of Nowhere in 1962, The Burning World in 1964, and The Crystal World in 1966. Residing in Shepperton, Ballard's 1970 short story collection, The Atrocity Exhibition, marked a shift towards more extreme themes, filled with gory images and explorations of extreme humanized sex and technology. The trend continued with his most controversial work, Crash, in 1973, which follows a group of car crash fetishists who become aroused by staging and participating in car accidents, also inspired by famous car crashes of celebrities. Concrete Island in 1974 and High Rise in 1975 depict middle-class civilians losing self-control, exploring the fragility of societal norms and the darker sides of the human nature. His 1990 short story, War Fever, was both humorous and dark, focusing on compulsory sex and how people hold oblivious attitudes being too focused on the media. Ballard continued to write until his death in 2009, leaving behind a legacy, though once controversial, is now highly regarded. The author's complex and controversial pieces of work, and possibly their own history, have left a lasting mark on the contemporary literature. Their exploration of themes on religion, sexuality, and political ideologies have sparked ongoing discussions and debates that continue to resonate in the present. Their legacies remind us of the power of storytelling to provoke thought, challenge the norms, and influence generations.